back there. All 8 of you in a pew. Would you like to spread out at all? Are you okay? There's a little space down here if everybody wants to. No? And I love Bruce Kirmmse, who's on first and showed up at 1 minute before 4. Isn't that awesome? It's really good. All right, well, my name is Sarah Gallop. I'm currently chair of the Randolph Foundation, and I also serve on the Randolph Church Board. And we came up with this idea 3 years ago, partly because we're gearing up for Celebration 2024. I have to always look at Judy and Al because I can never remember. And which I know seems like such a long time away, but we will celebrate our town's bicentennial then. And we wanted to begin all kinds of projects, and one of them being a collection of oral histories. So if you've been following the Story Slam at all, we place all the stories on the Randolph Foundation's YouTube channel. Isn't that funny all by itself? That the Randolph And we'll continue to do this probably right up till the bicentennial, and we might continue after that, sort of depends. We already have 5 people signed up for next year. Bill Minifie and I keep worrying that people are going to run out of stories or run out of courage or I know. So we do have 21 stories today, and the order is listed on the board here. And the way it works is that when I'm finished here, Bruce Kirmmse will come up, and the person who's after Bruce will go and sit in the on-deck chair, which says right there, on-deck chair. And you can see Michelle's already sitting there. Some people really follow instructions well. But let's have a test. So let's have a test. If Emily Douglas is on her way up here to tell her story, who's going to the on-deck chair? Randy. Right, that's good. You're smart. So we're just going to move through it like that, and we have a few more folks. Come on in and find a seat. We don't want you to stand. There's 2 spots over here. There's one there, one there. There's probably another here. Come on in, David. There's 5 chairs. Oh, and then there's 5 chairs coming down the wall over here. And there's chairs coming down the wall here. I want you to know that this seating arrangement is approved by George. And that's something. That's not nothing. All right, so we've asked each of the 21 storytellers to keep their story to 5 minutes. And some of you might recall that we had started at 4 minutes, and it felt a little rushed the first year, and we decided to add a minute. We did 5 minutes last year. That seemed to go pretty well. And we're sort of strict about it because our feeling is that if someone said to you that you need to come and sit down and listen to 21 stories, who would want to do that? It sounds awful. But if you knew that you had to come listen to 21 5-minute stories, and they really were going to be 5 minutes, you would probably hang in there, especially when you knew that there'd be wine and cheese and cabbage. So we do, we're sort of strict. All of our speakers have been practicing. We have a timer that we'll be keeping. You can see this is ready to go for you, Bruce, at 5. And then when Bruce gets to 3, we're going to tell him. When he gets to 2, we're going to tell him. When he gets to 1, he'll know. When he gets to 30 seconds, and then we get to 5. And I guess when I do mine, Randy, you'll have to time. You're free to use the signs. So I just want to thank a few people before we get started. Bill Minifie and I have been chairing this now for these past 3 years, and we have a really good time doing that. And so thanks, Bill. You're fun. And then Bill and Kempe and probably Hayden too, and probably Mary too, have been helping out with the food. You'll see a really nice spread of cheese and crackers and spreads and all kinds of stuff out there. So it looks great. And we know that the Alexanders have a gathering at their house tonight, but Haywood told me that that's going to start, where is Haywood? It's going to start after people have some refreshments out there. So what a wonderful place where we can all communicate well and make sure that we're well coordinated. And then I also want to thank Ben and Barb Finney. Barb helps us in many ways for this event, and then Ben and my husband Andy Gallop are behind this setup here, which I'm so happy I have nothing to do with. And this is how we record. We've moved on to an iPhone, which is really cool. Like, we think we're really cool now. And that's how we're going to upload it all onto YouTube. So, oh man, that was really funny. Who was that? That was very funny. I like that. That is good. And then probably really the most important thing, I think, we're experiencing community here. We all care about community, and we are asking for voluntary donations for the church's benevolences fund, which goes to actually Ted, name him.
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry. Ted's our chair, and the money goes directly to nonprofit agencies in the region that are helping people who are in need.
There are 5 different agencies that we support in the North Country. Quickly, the Coos County Family Health Services, the Gorham Community Learning Center, the Family Resource Center, Northern Human Services, North Country Home Health and Hospice. And so donations that you put in that basket, I want to be very clear, 100% of your donation goes directly to those agencies. We don't take anything off the top. 100%.
Yeah, that is true. So we're already collecting some money, and we really appreciate it. Thank you in advance for your generosity for people who are our neighbors. So I think that's it. Is there anything else that needs to be said? Anybody else who needs to be thanked?
Question. So we're in church here, and is there a penalty if you go beyond 5 minutes?
Oh yeah. Right. Actually, you reminded me of something. Could anybody on the Randolph Church Board please stand? Randolph Church Board. Wonderful. Look at them all. All right, thank you. And now stay standing, and now could the Randolph Foundation board members join them? Oh, there, okay, that was good. Yeah, some of them went like this. Yeah, wonderful, thank you all. These 2 organizations phones off, good one. Yep, phones on silent. Okay, let's go.
These stories are mostly set in West Randolph, an unknown country that lies beyond Lowe's store, known only by the Maddocks and Hudsons and my own family. I first came to Randolph as a teenager. I did a good deal of hiking, and I vowed that I'd buy some land here after I got out of college. In 1965, I was a year out of Wesleyan, and my only source of income was as a teaching assistant at the University of California, Berkeley. Believe it or not, if you were thrifty in those days, you could actually live in the Bay Area on a TA's income. After a late summer hiking trip through the Penny and the Presidential Range, I went to Lowe's garage and spoke to Gordon Lowe, whom I'd met several years earlier, and asked him whom I should talk to in connection with buying a few acres in Randolph. Gordon looked me over. He made a remark I think I've also heard related by others. Son, to buy land in Randolph, you've either got to be a full professor or a bishop in the Episcopal Church. Gordon allowed us how Jack Boothman was selling land on the hill, but when I looked into it, it was too steep for me, the price, not the land. I think it was about $1,750 an acre. So then Gordon said, well, you might want to see Pete Belageron, who owned land off the Valley Road in the west part of town, probably sell some of it for a price that was more affordable to me. Now, Pete Belageron's real first name was Napoleon, but he was a very straightforward, friendly, and un-Napoleonic man. Pete had a wife named Florence, who, as I recall, spoke little or no English, so we got on with my fractured high school college French. Belageron, by the way, is pronounced Bayajon, and there are quite a few Bayerjans in Quebec, which is where Pete and Florence originally come from. Here in New Hampshire, we Anglos feel that we have to add a number of consonants to the French so that we can pronounce it. Thus, Bayerjean ends up as Belargian, Belargian, or even Belageron or Belangian. Anyway, Pete showed me several parcels, and I chose 6 acres up on the hill. It was a rainy day, but I was sure it would have a good view. And he only wanted 200 an acre. Money, however, which I did not have. So I did what every young man does. I asked my father to lend me $1,200. And I told him it was a great value and that I would surely pay him back. My father was skeptical. How do I know it's worth the money, he asked. Oh, Dad, I'm sure it is. I'm sure we'll have a great view when the clouds lift. Well, my father, who was an administrator in the New York State Banking Department, wrote to an equivalent civil service servant in Concord, New Hampshire, and asked for the name of someone who could tell him whether the land was worth $1,200, which in the mid-60s was about the price of a new Volkswagen Beetle with no radio. My father was put in touch with Henry Bullock, president of Berlin City Bank. He said he would look into it and let my dad know. Mr. Bullock was good enough to come over and walk on the land. It was a sunny day. And he wrote to my father, quote, "If you don't lend your son the $1,200 to buy that land, I'm going to buy it myself." The check was in the mail. It took me almost 5 years to pay my father off, but neither of us ever regretted the deal. Since then, I've added another 20 or so adjoining acres, but I built my house on the original parcel, and I'm still very happy to be where I am. I have a couple of other West Randolph stories that I can share with you briefly if there's time. I've always had a vegetable garden, and in Randolph I've always had only middling results, which I blamed on the unbelievably poor soil, even though I added every sort of organic amendment and did everything just the way Mr. Rodale told us. My neighbor, Alman Farah, a wonderful older man who used to mow my pasture for me every year, had a terrific garden with beautiful tomatoes, peas, beans, you name it. So I decided I would seek out his old-time Yankee gardening wisdom. I went over to his place, hat in hand, as I always did, and humbly asked for the secret of his gardening success. Then Alman, I always called him Mr. Farah, opened the door of his shed, and there, gleaming with every sort of bright label, were the words Ortho, DuPont, Dow. And he said to me, "Chemicals, son, chemicals." And I had another neighbor, Charlie Lowe, who passed away recently. Charlie, in fact, had bought Pete and Florence Bayage's house when they had sold it. Charlie told me a story about earning money when he was a teenager. There was a lot of tree planting going on, both in the national forest and in privately owned forests. And the young trees were being girdled and eaten at a terrible clip by porcupines. So the state put a bounty on porcupines, 25 cents a head. Not exactly a head, but you had to cut off the porcupines' noses and bring them to the town clerk, who would give the industrious young man a quarter for every nose turned in. Now, Charlie and his friends had a scheme. They would trap as many porcupines as they could. Then, after cutting off the tip of the nose, they would also cut off the leathery pads of the porcupine's feet, after which they would take a hole punch and create 2 fake nostrils so that each porcupine brought the teenagers $1.25 instead of just 25 cents. The town clerk, Charlie said, would wrinkle up her nose at the smelly bucket filled with several dozen noses, only look at the top few and say, "How many?" and pay off the young swindlers who went happily on their way.
It was our first winter in Randolph. I think it was 2003, and the annual AVSAR Christmas party was going to be at Doug Mayer's. That stands for Androscoggin Valley Search and Rescue. Well, we thought with the weather forecasting a big snow dump, we'd save on parking space at Doug's and hike through the woods via a diagonal path directly to Chez Mayer. So off we went with snowshoes on our feet, headlamps on our heads through the thickening snowstorm.
There was already a good foot on the ground. We met up with Ray Cotmar and Dave Salisbury, coming up from their house on the Durand Road. They had the same idea. At Doug's house, the party commenced with much hilarity, a certain amount of libations, and plenty of search and rescue stories. About 10 o'clock, Jeff Tyree looked out the window and said, "Holy cow, it's really coming down out there. I better get home while I can." He lived in Lancaster. We thought that was a good idea. Our search and rescue team never got a call, so we assumed he got home. You know, Avsar is an undaunted bunch, so the party continued, finally culminating in Mike Pelchat singing the praises of Robert's service with his rendition of the cremation of Sam McGee, and then followed by the shooting of Dan McGrew in typical Pelchat style. We called it a night, headed off into the darkened storm. There was plenty of grumblings about, "Hey, do you think we can drive home on these roads? It must be a couple of feet of snow." Well, we laughed, because we were walking. We joined up with Ray and Dave and headed down the diagonal. But first, where was the diagonal? No trace of our steps. Where are the blazes? There's an extra 2 feet of snow on the ground by now. Well, somebody's sharp eyes finally caught the first blaze, and we struggled through those 2 additional feet of snow. Now, I'd left an outside light on when I left my house, but where was my turnoff? We named our connector trail Not Away in a burst of humor one day, but now it really wasn't very funny. So finally looking back, we glimpsed the light. Phew, we were saved. I never did find out how Ray and Dave made it home, because if you hike down the diagonal, you know it turns into open hardwoods, and it's really hard to follow even in the summertime. But we were home, safe and sound. Until morning, that is. Now we had 4 feet of snow out there. We'd really moved into winter. So, no worries, we're gonna fire up the snowblower, clear the driveway. Paul waded out to the garage. Only to find the machine wouldn't start. It was pretty cold. We need to heat it up a little bit. Well, that involved getting the kerosene heater and some fuel down at the shop. That's about 700 feet down the road. So he left this wobbly trough in the snow as he hiked down. That was okay, but now he had to carry the heater and the fuel tank back up, and the trail was only this wide. He made it. So we get back to the garage, fire up the snow blower, everything's beautiful, open up the garage doors, and there's a wall of snow, 5 feet high by now. So you pull forward into it, advance the auger, back up, and do it again. And again, and again. But we finally got all the way down to the end of the driveway. We think we are golden. Now for the final surprise. Woodspring Road hadn't been plowed yet. So what was the point of plowing out our driveway? Now, an hour later, Terry Corrigan showed up with the town plow. Wouldn't you know it? He plugged up the end of the driveway with about a 10-foot mountain of snow. So back to the snow blower, advance the auger, back up, do it again. Before that all turned to concrete, as we all know. So my lesson learned is never to underestimate a winter in Randolph.
This is a story about cats, lots of cats. Somewhere between 25 and 100 cats, or so the story goes, and a man named Billy Mitchell. In larger communities, Billy might have made the evening news when the Board of Health raided his home and condemned it for an overabundance of cats. But not here in Randolph. We live free or die and have as many damn cats as we want. We even feed the bears. No, Billy never made the evening news, since those were the days before the Randolph Weekly and the Mountain View. But I can assure you that there were any number of catty stories flying around the town. Billy lived in Pfeffer, down on the Valley Road, the house now owned by the Nichols. One of the beautiful classic homes built by John Boothman. However, I assure you that I doubt he envisioned it ever as a cat house. Billy drove 4 beautiful old LaSalles around the town, and you'd always be able to distinguish it from any other LaSalle that happened to drive by, because in the back seat was a small coffin. Yes, a cat coffin. Steve Hartman recounts the time he first saw it. Apparently one of the cats was really close to Billy, had passed away unexpectedly, and Billy had laid the cat in the coffin for a future trip to Boston. Well, when Steve saw it, the cat was quite mummified and quite dead. Billy told Steve that he was waiting to take the cat all the way to Boston to bury it in the family crypt with his mother. Or so the story goes. During the summer months, one could find Billy walking a cat or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever on a leash down the valley road. Now, anybody who's tried to do this with one cat appreciates the magnitude of the problem. It truly is impossible to herd cats. Then there was the time that Billy's neighbor, Max Pinkham, died. Lynn and Steve Hunt lived across the street at the time, and Billy appeared at their door on their porch with the news that Max was dead on his porch. And he had called all of their children to find out what to do, and apparently they all agreed, well, go see Lynn and Steve. So, well, Steve ran across the road, immediately started giving CPR to Max. All right, well, Billy called Curtis Bader, John McDowell, and the ambulance. Well, when John, who was new to town, arrived on the scene, he took one look at Lynn and Steve working so desperately to try and revive this man that he didn't have the courage to even tell him there was no point. He was thoroughly dead. The ambulance attendant offered to step in and take over, but Steve couldn't stand up because Curtis Bader was standing on his shoelaces. Well, they finally concluded that there was nothing they could do, or so the story goes. And one has to wonder what might have happened to poor Max if Billy had simply called the ambulance first. In the end of the Randolph part of this story, Billy took up with a woman who, and I kid you not, had almost as many dogs as he had cats. They moved to Stark, fortunately, or so the story goes. Jim Nichols bought Billy's house. Now, Jim was getting along in years, and many, even his own family, I suspect, wondered if he was still sound of mind. I'll leave it up to your imagination what the Nichols family discovered as they began to rip out all of the odor-filled wainscoting, floor, and subfloor. I've always wondered, even to this day, if not on a hot, muggy summer evening, even with all the windows wide open, one could still catch a whiff of eau de chat.
Only if it's raining.
When I set out to do this story, my intention actually was to make you all laugh, pretty much Billy's expense. However, the deeper I dug into it, the more it assumed the dimensions of a tragic comedy. Billy was eccentric, I grant you that, but he was no dummy. He was fastidious in maintaining his LaSalles, and he cared for and about his cats. And finally, I learned quickly that a lot of people had a lot of stories about Billy, some unquestionably true, some probably embellished over the years for effect. I lost my place. By now, all of you must be fairly catatonic. So the time has come for me to pause. And like the fog in Carl Sandburg's immortal poem, to go out on little cat's feet.
Hello. Well, this is a story that I know has been in my heart and soul for many, many years, and I share this story with the other 8 or 9 of us that experienced this. So I feel like I'm representing this as I'm looking at Ginger because she was with me on this incredible evening. And it all began at the Beringers farm I was about 18 years old, and there were about 8 or 9 of us we were all about the same age. 1979, and here we are at around 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and we look at each other full of energy as 18 and 19-year-olds are, and we all say, why don't we go hiking? And I think back now on this story, and I think, my goodness, this whole story has really impacted me for my entire life, really. But anyway, so the group of 8 or 9 of us take off at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and we say, where do you want to go? Well, let's just go up the Caps. Okay, let's just go up the Caps. Why not? And beautiful, beautiful night. It's full moon. As glistening, we all know the magic of Randolph. On a full moon, that we don't even need flashlights. And there was a big conversation. Do we need flashlights? No, we don't need flashlights. The moon is so bright. We can go by the moon. And some of us, I'm kind of scared. It's kind of dark. I don't know if I can hike in the dark. And I remember these conversations, but as a group, we said, let's just do this. We don't know how far we're going to go. We don't know how long we're going to go, but we're just going to go. And so off we go. We start hiking up the Caps. And everybody was absolutely right. The moon was so full that we didn't even need flashlights. And here we are, and we go to the first Cap. And again, it was so bright, and I kept thinking to myself, this is crazy that I could be hiking on a full moon night in this unbelievably magical place with a group of people, and I would never do this alone. Absolutely never. But with this group of people, I felt safe. So we kind of urged each other on, and we went into the first Cap, and then after we got to the first Cap, I remember a couple of people saying, oh, I don't know if I want to keep going, I'm kind of nervous. And so some people started to turn back home because they were getting tired. And we went to the second Cap, and the same thing happened second Cap, and there was kind of a core group of us that were just like, we're going, this is exciting. And so we go to the second Cap, and then a couple more people kind of went home, and we just kept going. And then we ended up third Cap, and then kind of more people kind of dwindled and went back home. And then there was a group of 4 of us who decided, we are having so much fun, let's just keep going. And it was just that moment, and again, it was this collaboration of the 4 of us. It was John Houston, it was Sandy Malcolm, it was Jim Alexander, Ginger, and me. Actually, that's 5 people. And
we lost Jim.
well, that was later. So here we are, hiking on the top of the Caps at full moon, not needing a flashlight, and working together to see where the path was, and being so young and so vibrant. So we continue up and up and up and up, and I'm getting the 2-minute warning. Okay. It just makes me so excited to tell the story because it lives so deeply. And we continue all the way up to the Madison Huts, and I remember us standing outside the Madison Huts, and everybody's snoring, and we're thinking, well, should we go and should we sneak in there and go to sleep? Nah, we don't want to do that. We thought, well, why don't we just go to the top of Madison and watch the sunrise? So that's what we did. A group of us went up to the top of Madison, and I will never forget sitting up at the top of Madison, having spent the entire night up by moonlight with this group of people. And so again, to finish on my story, I think it's the collaboration of all of us doing this together, unbelievable. And that this is a group of Randolphians, and I know that it kind of brought me, I live out on the West Coast, and I know that it's these experiences that just make me just absolutely full of life wanting these gorgeous mountains. So thank you, Randolph. Thank you, friends.
My story is about my real introduction to hiking the presidential peaks of the White Mountains, especially with the legendary former Hut Boy, director and treasurer of the Randolph Mountain Club, and possibly the world record holder for the fastest time to run up to Crag Camp, and points beyond, perhaps a couple of times a day, and probably carrying much needed heavy supplies for the huts. That legend is Jonathan Freed. John was a childhood friend of my wife, Lisa, and the Free and Jones families were old friends. John was a contemporary of some of you in this room. former Hut boys such as Guy Stever, Chris Campbell, Bill Arnold, and others. I first met John when we began coming up from Richmond, Virginia to Randolph for short vacations in the 1970s. Our hike took place during the summer of 1984. I was 36 years old, active, had hair on most of my head. I was still playing basketball, albeit primarily half court, walking riverbeds, jumping from rock to rock, and fast walking for exercise. I thought I was in decent shape. As a summer person, I'd gone on several hikes in previous years, hiking with John, Nancy crossing Fringe to Ice Gulch, and trekking up Mount Madison with Larry, my brother-in-law. So I thought, hey, I can do this. Since I used to complain about not hiking much to counterbalance working on our cottage, I imagine Lisa thought going on a real hike with John would be a great experience for me. As John was interested, we started planning for a leisurely hike of 4 to 5 miles, taking maybe 5 to 6 hours. A couple of days later, he called to ask if we could go farther, and would I be up for 6 to 7 miles. Plus, would I mind if his nephew, John, came along? Then a day or two later, he called to say the distance would be more like 8 or 9 miles. And would that be acceptable? I began thinking, what have I gotten myself into? And really, I had no idea. Here's my entry from our family journal. I went on a marathon hike with John Free and his nephew John and nearly went crazy. We ascended the Caps Ridge Trail to Mount Jefferson, down the Six Husbands to an alpine meadow only John, God, and a select few knew about, over to Edmund's Call and a nearby spring, then up to the summit of Adams, finally working our way down off the mountain with a few side trips, including visits to Grey Knob and Crag. I honestly didn't think I'd make it. As an aside, this was unlike any long hike I'd ever experienced as a grunt in the Army, with full gear and a weapon. The views of Mount Washington, McCog, and Bretton Woods were terrific from Jefferson. I sat in a cloud on Adams, and the views of King, Rabine, and Randolph were wonderful from Crag. I remember John wearing boots, shorts, a t-shirt, not carrying a pack or even water, and not breaking a sweat. I was dressed in similar fashion, except that I had a backpack with water, bug dope, windbreaker, first aid kit, sketchbook, a camera, and other supplies. It seemed to me that John ran, tearing up the trail, leaping over boulders, and possibly flying at several points. His nephew mostly keeping up with him. I labored slowly, hiking up and around rocks, feeling as if I was moving in a snail's pace. Sweating profusely, stopping frequently to rest, trying to appreciate where I was and what I could see, and consuming all my water before reaching Edmund's Call, where we ate lunch. John was good-natured and would wait for me to catch up. Somehow I made it down totally exhausted, sore, and completely dehydrated. While I could barely walk, John looked at as if he could just run right back up to Crag. We had hiked between 9 and 10 miles over 9 hours or so. A hot shower never felt so good. Sadly, I never got to know John well. That 1 minute sign freaked me out. But developed a great deal of admiration for him, his intelligence and sense of humor, athletic prowess, his love of the mountains, and his service to the Armed Sea and the U.S. Navy. Sadly, he passed away from cancer in 1986, less than 2 years later. He was just 40 years old. His memorial service was held in the Playhouse. Lisa and I always wondered if this hike was his last big one. So what did I learn from this experience? To check out the distances, time, and physical challenges for each hike and know what to expect. Take it easy, especially if you're a gawker like me, and take lots of liquid and protein, and some other stuff like a phone. If you're an artist like me, proceed with caution if you're hiking with an engineer. Don't be afraid to say thanks, but no thanks, even for the sake of friendship.
I have yet another story about hiking. Mine is entitled, "Why do people do this anyway?" A year or so ago, I was hiking with my nieces and a friend of theirs who had never hiked before. We were going up Dome Rock, an easy hike to start her off. Things slowed down as we crossed the water and headed up the steeper trail. She made it to the top with difficulty, and we had fun flashing mirrors across the valley to Dolinkempi and our houses. On the way down, the others left her behind, and I stayed with her. She started to cry, and she said, "Why do people do this anyway?" And hiking is awful for some people. My own kids never took to it at all. I remember my husband Jonathan cajoling my son Samuel, then 8 or so, with 1 M&M for every 100 steps he took. And we had to make up stories to drown out the inevitable, "When is this going to be over?" I remember arriving fresh to Randolph in 1972 in my early 20s, having never hiked before. My idea of summer was the New Jersey beach. Hiking meant a walk across a field, not up. The first hike, which was a Randolph Mountain Club hike, that I ever went on in my white, super smooth soled tennis sneakers was up the Chemin des Dames. And the second one was South Baldface. I can remember having very similar thoughts as the young friend, looking down below from a cliff on South Baldface, saying, "Are these people crazy?" And even now, usually about 2/3 of the way up the hike, I start muttering, "Whose idea was this anyway? And why am I doing this?" Like when I was in the middle of labor and childbirth, saying to myself, "How did I let this happen?" There is that element of pride in being able to do something hard, pushing yourself beyond what you know you can do comfortably. It doesn't matter that you're stuck with no recourse. You have to keep going or give up and go down. I've often heard it said that the best part of hiking is when you get down and it's all over. You feel really good because you've accomplished something within yourself. But that's not the real reason I come back year after year, why somewhere inside me I am hooked on it. It's that when you get up there, up above the tree line, up where those bare rocks are, you are in another reality. You breathe in a different world, a different consciousness. Everything material is left behind. All your possessions, all the things that keep you busy day after day, all the things you should do and all the things that didn't go right. It's just you and your boots and your sandwich and your friends. It's different up there. It's a taste of how God sees the world. What it would be like to be a bird. It's forever. It's eternity. You can see for miles and everything that is below, including your own life, which seems very small and insignificant. There's another reality that is so much more important. I take that down with me, and though it feels good to go home and shower and eat good food, I don't forget that up there is something that beckons and calls more to life than what we do every day and think is so important. And the days I don't hike, I love to sit on the porch at 6 a.m. and I look at the dawn light making Madison and Adams glow pink. Those beautiful rocks are again something eternal. They were here thousands of years before me and will be thousands of years after me. They remind me of the beautiful pink rock of Petra and Luxor and Sedona. They are all the same. Something that takes me out of myself and says, "Look at me, I am eternal majesty." So I understand when someone says, "Why do people do this? This is awful." And I also understand why people spend their lives hiking, because it truly is a taste of heaven.
This story properly belongs to Michele Alexander, who graciously consented to let me tell it. For as long as I can remember, we would come up here to Randolph for 1 week every summer to visit Renee Sanders and climb the White Mountains, often beginning our hikes at the Ravine House. On Saturday evenings, we would enjoy Jack Boothman's buffet, possibly followed by square dancing at Sugar Plum Farm. On Sundays, we'd attend services here. When I became sufficiently skilled at the organ, I would join the rotation of musicians accompanying services in this place. In those days, we had an SD reed organ, a truly pitiful instrument. A reed organ operates under the same principle as you use when you take a piece of grass and hold it lengthwise between your thumbs and blow on it. I had often wondered whether a bunch of pieces of grass wouldn't have been preferable to that organ. But who was I to complain? The instrument had recently been electrified, so we no longer had to pump with our feet to make the damn thing sound. The worst part of it, when the instrument became most obviously deficient, came in hymn singing. The congregation sang lustily and always behind the beat. And the organ wasn't loud enough to enforce a tempo. But pity the inexperienced organist who slowed down to join the congregation, which only slowed down further, to the point that you wondered whether you'd ever get through the hymn alive. Things came to a head at Daphne Cross's funeral, when the entire community of Randolph tried to cram into this space. The organ was obviously overmatched. At the reception afterwards, Hirsch Cross approached Haywood, the head of the music department, and allowed us how the organ really didn't seem to be up to the church. Haywood coughed discreetly and just agreed. Hirsch asked him how much it would cost for a proper pipe organ. And when Haywood told him, he said, "That much, huh?" Echoing the sentiments of every church organ committee that's ever met. The reception continued. Hirsch came back to Haywood, said, "Tell you what, I'll give you half." Haywood was too astonished to say anything to this munificent offer from someone whose feet rarely crossed the threshold of Randolph Church. The reception continued. Hirsch came back and said, "You're never going to be able to raise the other half. Hell, I'll pay for the whole thing." So Haywood got in touch with Charles Ruggles, the organ builder, and since 1997, this church has now been graced with a magnificent 2-manual tracker action organ, hampered only by the occasional invasion of resident mice. And the hymn singing has never been better.
The hazelnut. Alas, you stand no more. You were our nest for 25 summers. A tiny cottage, once a carriage house on the Stearns farm in the late 1890s. Within your walls, our children's love of mountains was born. Many mud seasons tilted you. Carpenter ants digested you. And property taxes ultimately buried you. Where you were is now meadow and memory. So come with me to the meadow and open the door to memory. As you enter, a small vestibule welcomes you to tea. A china teapot, cups and saucers, creamers and sugar bowls sit ready on shelves to the right of the doorway. A table is folded against the wall, waiting for the long-skirted women of the past to return from the trails. Next to this vestibule is the 2-butt kitchen.
My husband George is at the sink and I am at the stove back to back. We must move about in an intimate, synchronized dance. If I wish to open the refrigerator while not disturbing George at the sink, I can conveniently do this by exiting the kitchen, circling through the living room, through the living area to the bathroom, opening bathroom door number 1, exiting by bathroom door number 2, which leads to the kitchen back, and voila! I am at the refrigerator on George's other side. George enjoys another surprising convenience. When shaving into the bathroom, he can easily watch his oatmeal cooking on the stove. The design is ingenious. The living area, a single space, has 3 lives. At one end are 2 cots for our 2 boys, and at the other a full-size bed. Across each sleeping area, a burgundy velvet drape partitions it for privacy. In the cozy central seating area, the sun filters through red curtained windows, catches in the strands of an orange shag rug, and rests there beneath the warm tones of the wooden walls. A very small Franklin stove suggests warmth, but never lives up to it. Off the living area is an added screened porch. I'd love to sleep there on my pad, only 6 inches above the ground. I'm on ear level with the meadow and I can listen to its music and breeze. From there I see my first bear. I hear its rhythmic swish through the grass in the night. It's heading to next door where the Turnbulls live. I call the Turnbulls. That's a telephone. I call the Turnbulls to warn them a bear is coming. Thank you, says Ian Turnbull kindly, and goes back to sleep. There is an attic, and the ladder-like staircase to it cuts through, of course, through the 2-bud kitchen. We go up to raid the wooden box of old games and puzzles. Screened metal boxes hold more old china, chairs and kitchen items are abandoned among wooden scraps and tar paper. Sharp ends of roof nails poke through the ceiling, better to not stand tall. The attic is mouseland. They live rent-free. At night, I hear their feet scratching as they scramble down to the kitchen. Watch out, mouse, I'm coming after you. My flashlight freezes one on the stairway. We stare at each other. Its eyes are so sweet and bright. The boys grow up. Their cots are shrinking. Their tussling is felt throughout the cottage. George pens this warning to them. Step softly in the hazelnut. Its walls do tightly squeeze us. One single step an earthquake makes will dash a glass to pieces. We leave the hazelnut now, walk out the door and look back. See the teapot on the top shelf, sitting alone behind the high window, waiting for our return. In 2005, the 110-year-old hazelnut was dismantled, a mere footnote in Randolph history. Step softly in the hazelnuts.
In the late summer of 1905, a cabin was erected on the northern flank of Mount Adams at an altitude of 4,375 feet. The cabin was built by 2 churchmen in partnership, Charles Stearns and Edward Hinks, and was christened Grey Knob. The goings-on at the cabin are recorded in 3 logbooks, the first entry of which appears 5 July 1906. Also in 1906, Stearns was appointed to a professorship at Pomona College, and he and his family, having moved to California, disappeared from the cabin's logbook. The core members of the Hinks family were Edward and his second wife Elizabeth, known as Bessie, and their children Anne, Nan, Sarah, Carol, a male, Edward, Elizabeth, known as Tibby, and Caroline, known as Toddy. Some of you may have known these people. On reading the logbooks, it's immediately apparent that life at Grey Knob was a vibrant, joyful experience. The Hinks family and their guests, over 800 names appear by 1943, had fun. Mrs. Hinks loved to entertain, and the meals turned out at the mountain cabin were imaginative and tasty. And it seems people were always arriving with more supplies. The members of the family were intelligent, well-educated, and conversable, and the guests were usually of the same stripe. One salient feature of the log entries is the pervasive presence of poetry. Some of it doggerel, some of it of better quality, some brief in form, and some quite extended. The first example from the male perspective appeared on 3 August 1907, and it offered a challenge not only for poetic competition, but a competition between the sexes. 3 jolly bummers, ain't we clever all we 3? So we fly the poetry to show what a Grey Knob log may be. The challenge in both senses was taken up almost immediately on 6 August 1907 from the distaff side by Alice Stearns and Rachel Schaufler, who found the cabin uninhabited and astonishingly in good order. How sorrowful it is to stand alone among the ruins of the sweet has-been. How desolate to see not e'en one bone. So garnished have they left the place so clean. No, it were better that I stayed away, when members of my sex may inhabit here. Back to the woods, 'twas there I went, while they did steep their callous souls with tea and cheer. But those dear boys, the impressionable 3, here will I wait till they come back to me. You won't run into stuff like that much, do you? With such an invitation, it was to be accepted that the limerick form would rear its head. On 14 September 1908, the Reverend John H. Grant dedicates 2 of an extensive set of limericks to Abby Frances Pease, the mother of Arthur Stanley Pease, and to Elizabeth Miss Lizzie Jones. There wasn't much like Mistress Pease. She traveled o'er land and o'er seas. She could work, she could play, she could cook and crochet, and all with consummate ease. Well, there was a star hiker named Jones. She hiked and gallumped all the cones. At a stake or a skirt, she was wondrous expert, and jollity reigned in her tones. Okay. On June 21st, 1909, Sarah and Edward Hinks honor their cousin Jimmy Ludlam, a mountain neophyte. Cousin Jimmy came from Bridgeport to carry home his wife. We took him up the mountains and tried to take his life, from Grey Knob or Jefferson, from Beersheba to Dan. Where'er he stopped to catch his breath, we said, come on, and ran. I will take a couple of extra seconds. The rain, it rained every day, but up the spur trail wound their way 5 stout souls whose feet were limber to ford the creeks and climb the timber. The 2 gazelles leaped light ahead. Behind, with lowly bending head, plodded the ancient dames, and slow, remembering tramps of long ago. While in the rear, with many prances and shining eyes, came little Frances, sometimes with sweater, sometimes not, skipping along from grot to grot. Whether you live in the domain of little Frances, that of ancient dames, or somewhere in between, if you love the northern peaks and the trails and camps thereon, the Grey Knob logbooks offer entry to an era now past, but one that I hope may excite and ignite a glow of recognition.
Hi, I'm Lucy. Okay. I, like many other imaginative 10-year-olds, went through a pirate phase. I read books about Blackbeard and Long John Silver, and loved especially Anne Bonny, the fearsome female pirate who roamed the seas and bested any man she encountered, because, of course, a female pirate would have more brawn and brains than any man. I would climb trees to the top and act as a lookout, or pretend that the hammock on our front porch was a ship rolling with the tide, and was constantly reading any material that I could get my hands on that involved adventure on the high seas. My favorite pirate ship, however, was a small, almost triangular rock on the side of Randolph Hill Road. I would stand on the rock and imagine I was sailing my way down the thin channel of grass between the pavement on my right and the stone wall on my left. I could see myself navigating the roadside as a treacherous channel along a coral reef or into a lagoon that would lead me to a lush tropical island. The black flies swarming around me I imagined were fish, not a nuisance, but the only sustenance I would have for the months, maybe years, of my voyage. And I saw the rolling outlines of Madison and Adams as huge swells in the distance, threatening to sink my ship if I didn't man the mizzenmast or batten down the hatches. The only problem with my pirate fantasy was that no matter how many times I scratched at the dirt on the side of the road or dug with a gardening trowel into the lawn, I never seemed to be able to find any treasure. I would unearth worms and sometimes interesting rocks, but the gold doubloons that always resided under the massive red X in my pirate books consistently evaded me. One particularly hot afternoon on the hill, covered in black fly bites and with fingers grubby from digging in the dirt, I returned to our family house where someone had recently suggested we all go down for a swim in the Ravine House pool. Never one to pass up the chance to test out my pirating abilities in actual water, I readily agreed, and we all piled into the car and headed down the hill, ready to jump into and immediately jump out of the frigid water. We lined up our shoes and towels at the edge of the water and carefully picked our way barefoot through the gravel and stood on the edge of the dam, gathering the courage and steeling ourselves for the jump. I looked into the water and shivered inwardly, reminding myself that cold water certainly wouldn't frighten Anne Bonny. I strapped on my goggles and peered into the depths. That's when I saw it. I think I see a dollar bill. My aunt came over and craned her neck over the water, following my pointing chubby finger. No way, she said. I was undeterred. Excitedly, and with all my worries about water temperature forgotten, I jumped into the water and swam to the bottom, rooting around in the sand and kicking up sediment that made it impossible for me to see even with my goggles on tight. With my arms outstretched and running out of breath, my fingers brushed against something papery and I closed my fist as tightly as I could. With my arm above my head triumphantly, I burst through the surface of the water and yelled, $1! So, I found my pirate treasure in the Ravine House pool.
Names in Randolph. The names in Randolph do not roll off the tongue, whether chanted, spoken, or even sung. Adams to Zeeman make me peruse my Webster, as do Darlington, Demers, Doyle, or Dempster. Oh yes, one might gallop through on a fulsome flight, forsoothing foresight and letting day be night. But still, upon rising, I don't get cross, 'cause I knows I'll soon be seeing the arching bows. Once at Libby's I was asked, did I want a table? No, sir, I said, I want a booth, and if able. I noticed they were Pfeffer serving, not even Christmas. I found it unnerving. Over by the bar, playing at Turtles Ninja, were Jenn and John Scarinza, who said the sap this year had a great run. So much fun, a real sapping ton. Feeling kind of trembly, I craved the Sunday hot fudge, and on the hunt, making the rounds, was John Mudge, who, wearing Kelly green with such an air, said he could not go so low, it was just not fair. Fudge was out, but he'd make a pancake stacky, so long as he could eat it with Bob Onaki. But the Hubbard was bare, John was not on the staff, and I saw coming in Walter and Ingrid Graff, asking if Liz would grant them bean soup by Campbell, with some Walsh rabbit on Arnold bread to sample. I knew that to that they were very partials. It was also a favorite of Ann Barshall's, who, by the way, detested rare pork, not like Spam. She wanted a fully cooked roast, in short, a done ham. Just then a man from IBM came in, a real Teczar, who had gleaned from the grind so far that we had Eisens, both Bud and Bird. He said that was really quite superb. He demarcated it using his laptop and with a frown said he wanted a meal of some chips cooked brown. Not pale and wimpy as in Britain they cooked them, but all brunette and fried to the core end. Cooked like a furnace in a great big pan, along with eggs McCoochie and gulick to match, would be an ummiger dinger Weatherly Prairie dispatch. I murmured to him that Libby's eggs were newly hatched. But it was time to leave Libby's, and feeling poor, left only Tibbets and Nichols for Liz and Steve's store. But just then, bigger than life coming in were the Reverends Hess and McLaughlin, who ordered sandwiches with just one pickle on. Not really, but what else rhymes with Mieklejohn? Getting my car into John and Kathy McDowell I ran. Feeling faint, I asked Doc if he were a heart man. He said post-haste I should drink some green lee and eat cucumber sandwiches, cutter, diagonally. All went straight to bed and dreamed, oi, what a wreck. The names like Hawkins, Jenkins, Hudson, and Monowek, Beringer, Albee, Bishop, Sleeman, just a dream, would miraculously fit into my rhyming scheme. Now I knew there was no escaping scot-free, and even if I may or not see Lydia Ogilvy, her poodles would find me, but I'd nothing to fear, for cruising down the path was Paul Cormier. Standing so tall, he must have done the Alexander technique, or maybe he'd done some rowing with Sister Monique. Sister was a wily rower, leaving no stone unturned. She cut through the water a sharp cleaver. She made a believer out of me and Guy Stever. He was Sandin Douglas Fir making a bowl while practicing some lines for a brand new role. His part as an angry medic was a shock. An MD so furious, a veritable mad dog. He said he had just Shilke back from Paris, where he'd seen Beth and Sandy Harris, who had parlez-vous with French folk galore, but Clement all they found it a bore, and so bumping into Barbara and Finny Ben, whose B&B was a tattered old room, a used den, that had only a cot wall, not even a mattress. They had tossed and turned all night, alas, but there was no time for Shanker and crying. They had to meet up with Caesar and Gail Bryan, who had overdaled and underhilled rather madly, to meet with Dwight, Lauren, and Paula Bradley. Traveling back to Randolph with all their stuff, they'd gotten on a bus, and there was Charlotte Woodruff, who was clad in a Stuart McLennan plaid, looking like a Y session she just had, so rad. She was back from Rome, having thrown 3 points in some fountains, but Klaus Goetze was home at last to her mountains. Now how will this end, Kirmmse, asking yourselves? No mention of Mallet, Bowers, or even the Purcells. And well you might query, where are the weirs? I know I can find a rhyme if I just perseveres. And I didn't get all blankety blank when it came to the Wenks. Some names are easier, for which I give thanks. I'm sure it's fine to rhyme Nagel with Bagel, but trying for Bailey I can't finagle. And then there's Baldwin, Barton, Henderson, Johnson, Kenyon, and Lake. All hard except in Lake, which is a piece of cake. But take Matheson, Wilson, Sisson, Koopman, Kellner, Davis, Parker, Smith, oh, Hellner. Okay, Smith's fine if you think of kin and kith, or the 5th myth about the 50 monolith. But we haven't touched upon Potter, Ross, Horton, or Penny, and I'm sure lots of others. How many? It's not an idle boast to say I have strived. More than 140 names I have contrived. If one's been left out, if it's been omitted, it's a sin of omission that's been committed. And if Ann Keniston did not get attention, with apprehension I'd face detention. Finally, writing poems should not be for free. I sent off an invoice asking a maxi fee. It went off with great alacrity, but I didn't even get a Minifie.
Hi, my name is Jenn Barton Scarinza, and I'm really thankful to be a part of this community. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about a rescue mission. Now, this is not the normal rescue mission that you might think of in Randolph, where we go up into the mountains and bring down an injured hiker. No, this is the mission to recover the large crystal that is now on display in our town library. My geologist friends, the Bradleys, tell me that it is technically a mass of terminated quartz crystals. Much larger, but very similar to this one. And if you've not seen it, you really must. First, a little history. The quartz crystal mine that's located on land that is now part of the Randolph Community Forest was active during World War II when GE used the high-quality quartz in radios. The story is that at the peak of production, oxen carts were used to haul the crystals out of the woods. And since I raised oxen as a kid, I think that's pretty neat. When GE closed the mine down, they blew it up for safety reasons. In the 60s, the paper company owned the land and they again closed it off. Hobbyists, gem, and mineral collectors found a small opening in the seam and have been able to enjoy seeing the sparkly crystals in the ground and also collecting small pieces. Only certain people in the region knew about the mine. When negotiations for the formation of the community forest were happening around the year 2000, the Presidential Gem and Mineral Club was in touch to make sure they would still be able to enjoy this special spot, so an arrangement was made. All was thought to be well until the summer of 2011, when club leaders called to say there had been a violation happening at the crystal mine. Someone had been using power tools to break up large chunks of crystal, removing them foreseeably for sale. Members of the Gem Club had arrived at the mine to find a huge mass of crystals underwater in the bottom of the hole with a rope tied around it. The members knew the thieves would be back, so they hauled it out themselves, and they buried it a short distance from the mine. This bought some time. There was also a stash of tools wrapped in canvas and buried in leaves, so we knew they were serious. By now, my John has officially retired from police work, but he is never one to shy away from an investigation. He went into surveillance mode and soon found a truck of interest that had crystals and a rock hammer on the dashboard. Later, when John encountered the owner of this truck, the guy denied knowing where the crystal mine was and said he was merely out for a hike. And unless you're one of the many geologists in Randolph, you don't generally go hiking with your rock hammer. John tells me that later when he caught the guy in the hole, he snapped his picture and said, "Oh my word, you were out hiking and fell into a crystal mine." He was later prosecuted. So that leaves us with a giant mass of quartz crystals buried in the woods and a very concerned group of mineral enthusiasts. They organized a trip on Labor Day to retrieve the crystal, and John wanted to know, did I want to go? Well, I'm a high school teacher. We start school the day after Labor Day, so oftentimes my holiday is filled with planning and prepping, but I had never once regretted joining my then fiance on an adventure, and so I was up for it. We were the grunts of the operation, and the Gem Club folks were the true masterminds. They came prepared. This crystal was reported to weigh 60 to 80 pounds, and we brought a packboard, John thinking he could perhaps carry it out on his back. Well, that thing weighs a couple $100 pounds. There were a dozen of us that day, 9 from the club, John, myself, and David Wilcox. To our relief, the crystal was still there. This crew was on a mission with a sense of urgency. Someone had built a rock hauling rig, a wooden frame with a set of wheels, almost like a rickshaw. We first rolled the crystal onto a sturdy tarp and we had to haul it and drag it up to the height of the land where we strapped it onto the rickshaw, and then commenced several hours of rolling, dragging, lifting. People in the front were clearing the brush, people on the sides were lifting with straps, and people in the back were lifting and pushing, and I was on the front on the bar, really wishing hard for a team of oxen. The axle bent, and a short ways from where the trucks were parked, a wheel started to come off, so it was really good that we were almost there. If you see the picture of us, the 12, gathered around this crystal, we looked and felt like a superhero rescue team. The crystal ended up in the Scarinza dooryard and sat next to the chicken house until it was decided that it should go on display someplace in town. And thank goodness for Larry and Yvonne Jenkins, who took on the task of really cleaning it up to be as gorgeous as it is now. School started for me as usual that year, but I will always be glad that I got to be a part of the rescue of the Randolph crystal.
I was about 12 years old one hot August day when my Aunt Babsy decided to take me and my older brother down to the greenhouse pool to cool down a bit. So we loaded up her car with her stand-up paddleboard and ourselves, and we made our way down there. And she took care to point out the stand of trees she had seen a bear in a few weeks before across from the library. Now, we were able to fit in the car on the way down, but when we were soaking wet, somehow we were not able to load the paddleboard and myself and my brother back into her Prius. So she decided to take the precious cargo, stand-up paddleboard, and my brother and I were allowed to walk back. So we made our way, and an unsupervised 12-year-old and his older brother, I did what I was put on this earth to do, and started bothering the hell out of him. I said, Matt, right there, that's where she saw the bears. I think I see one. No, there's no bears. There's no bears. Now keep in mind, where we're from in New Jersey, if you see a bear, you're having a bad day. So we're walking along, and I keep, getting and poking and prodding. There's a bear. You see that? Stop. There's a bear. We keep walking along. He doesn't believe me. And then finally, I'm starting to psych myself out because I see something out there. Now, actually stop this time. Hold on. Shut up, Joey. There's no bears. There's no such thing as bears. No, really, Matt. I think there are actually bears out there. And he's like, okay, fine. So we stop and we look and we peer through the woods, and sure enough, we see a mama bear and two little cubs up in those trees. I think there were some apples or something they were reaching up there for. And they're clawing at each other, these two little cubs. And right then I related so deeply to those bears. Those two little, I can only assume, brother bears at each other's throats. Thank you.
This is something that I wrote on July 6th in Echo Bank to my great-great-grandfather, Lewis F. Cutter, at us both being at the age of 21. And it's called At the Threshold of Adulthood. I am completely alone here in your house. There is a thunderstorm breaking all around me and right above me. I am the same age you were when you first mapped the mountains. Isn't that incredible? You started your legacy at 21. That last crash was the loudest I've ever heard, and the first one to scare me. My mother thinks I'm crazy not to be afraid of thunder up here. You came here at 21, stayed in the ravine house, which no longer exists, and fell so much in love with these mountains that you mapped King's Ravine for your thesis. My thesis is about you. It's about you and your descendants. At 21, there are so many things that you don't know. You haven't even met Mary Osgood yet. But you were the same age as I am. I wonder what you thought your legacy would be. You didn't even have your civil engineering degree yet. I bet you thought it would be some building project in Boston, but you loved it here. I don't blame you. The mountains are breathtaking from the houses, and that's to say nothing of the views from the mountains themselves. And even in the woods, where you can't see the mountains, there are the waterfalls. I wonder when you saw Coldbrook for the falls for the first time. It's mesmerizing. The closest thing I've ever felt to breathing in its breeze is the harmonizing of voices in prayer. I wonder if you felt that. And yet this place wasn't built into your bones the way it is into mine. You weren't born coming here. That was a decision. You decided to renovate this house and the one across the street. You bought the house with the best view, the best view in the world. I can't even see it now. The clouds completely cover it. I feel their presence, though. I wonder if I would feel that, even if I didn't know. I'm glad you made that decision. Excuse me, sorry. I'm glad you would instill in your grandson a love of the mountains that would bring him back here with his family year after year. I'm glad that my mother did the same. Someday your maps will be forgotten, just as your father's cataloging system is. Only those who really care about the field will remember you. My potential children will live their whole lives without your maps being used by the guidebooks. But I promise you, even as you and I are both starting out with writing our theses, that they will come to your house. Not because it is yours, but because this place is unlike any other. That is your legacy, and that is at least a small part of mine. The thunder has pretty much disappeared, but I can still see ferns twitching with raindrops out the window. The foxgloves are drooping even more than they usually do. The rain is still dripping off the porch roof, but it is not coming off in streams like it was earlier. At 21, no one knows the course their life will take them in. I certainly don't. When you arrived here for the first time, did you think that you would keep coming back for more than half a century? Did you have any idea that you would buy a summer house here? Did you have any idea how much you and your actions would mean to a great-great-granddaughter who is sitting in a rocking chair that you once owned in your house? Louis Fairweather Cutter, what do I not know?
So I had been feeling guilty about the 1970s. And I think what brought it on was a college reunion that I went to in May. It was my 40th. Guy Stever, I'm brimming with advice for how you're going to nail your 50th next year. 40th, that means I graduated from college in 1979. I was in college in the second half of the 70s, but what I was feeling badly about actually happened in Randolph in the beginning part of the 70s, and I guess you would call it now an act of environmental vandalism in which I participated. And I'm old enough to have really got to be part of the environmental vandalism that we used to really bring us together, like throwing garbage off into King Ravine from Crag Camp, the bottles and cans and that sort of thing. But this other project, I think we probably thought it was a good idea at the time, and what it was the construction of a tent site on Mount Madison, led by John Houston in about 1972 or 73, and John, of course, was a leader in the RMC at the time, very charismatic person, and had access to a significant pool of teenage volunteer labor. Houston, Mieklejohn, I don't know who else was there, but up we went on the Pine Link on a summer day, axes and saws and clippers and crowbars, and when we got to near the junction of the two trails, a little bit west of the Hacker Ridge Trail, John showed us a place where we were to level a little area of the forest and make places for two tents on one side of the trail. On the other side, he had found a spring. So we went nuts. We just cut down everything that we could. He was, this was, it was a sort of teen jobs program, I guess. And the second part of the story was a camping trip that I went on in 1973. A bunch of us were 16. Me, Tom Brunick, Jim Grant, as we knew him then, Catherine and Christine Mermier, and their friend Heidi McKinley. And the best thing to say about it was it was about as well planned and executed as any camping trip organized by 16-year-olds in an afternoon. Went up the Pine Link and spent most of the evening trying to cook and then trying to eat the totally inappropriate food we had brought. Lamb shish kebabs on the brochette, you know, marinating in a garbage bag, hanging off the back of the bin bag. And after trying to eat this stuff, that we went to bed feeling both sick and hungry. About a half an hour, and then spent the rest of the night completely awake in the middle of this big light and sound show from the colossal thunderstorm that settled onto Mount Madison that night. Which, if any of us had thought to call the observatory, they would have been happy to tell us was coming, but you know, we had no idea. We, you know, came down the trail the next morning. There were a lot of parents down there at the junction of the Sylvan Way and the Hauker Ridge Trail, so because it had been a pretty big storm. And you know, I got over the 16-year-old part, but I always just felt terrible about hacking up the wilderness there on the Hauker Ridge. You know, you couldn't, you look at what you have to do with the Forest Service now to cut a twig near Craig. See me after about that, I'm not going to put that on the tape. But the last part of the story was just a few years ago, I found myself on Madison again, having gone up the Watson Path. Beautiful day, spent a lot of time on the summit, ran out of water, and on the way down the Hauker Ridge, I took a deep breath. I said, I guess I better go look and see about that mess that we made on the Pine Link, and I'll get some water because there's a spring there, right? So we went. I found the curve in the trail where I knew that we had cut, you know, this way and that way, and looked and looked and looked, and let me tell you, there was nothing there. There are not even a lot of people on that trail, let alone any evidence that anybody had ever cut a tree or dug out a spring. And so on the one hand, it was nice to know that you know, healing comes after 40 years, but it was also one of those kind of weird experience, those time experiences that happened to me in Randolph, because some, you know, I come here to enjoy time will stand still, or sometimes run the clock backwards, but this was one of those things that where it just jumped ahead on me a couple of decades, and you know, how did that happen? And it made me realize that when I was younger, I thought that when I got older, time would kind of slow down a little bit, and things wouldn't be so rushed, and I clearly had that backwards.
I'm Ginger, Marie's daughter, and I have two stories. They're related, and they have to do with my years on trail crew. So back in, would have been 1981, I found myself in the very strange position of being the head of trail crew. I didn't really want the position, but I had seniority because it was my 4th year. And that year, Klaus Bretze was leading trail, heading trail crew. Up until that time, my 3 previous years had been Jack Stewart. And I remember it was a succession of about 2 days where normally what we would do is we'd show up in the morning and that we would be given our you know, the tasks for the day. And we'd show up with our sickles and our axes and our saws and whatever, you know, crowbars or whatever tools we were using. And this particular day, I showed up at Klaus's, and it was my younger brother who was on trail crew, which was really a pain in the neck. His friend, who really was quite lazy, hard to get him to work, and then it was Charlie Bruning. So that was the crew. I showed up, and it turned out there had been a huge blowdown on Pasture Path. Now, some of you might remember this blowdown, and you might remember it differently than I do. But for me, it was like a sequoia had fallen on the Pasture Path. And my memory is it was just absolutely a huge tree. And so Klaus said, I've got a double saw for you. And I said, what? You expect us to remove this with a double saw? And I argued back and forth. I said, my dad taught me how to use a chainsaw when I was like, 13, and we could use the chainsaw, and Klaus wouldn't have anything to do with it. And now, as I'm older, I can see, probably wasn't such a good idea to give me a chainsaw. But anyway, back and forth. Finally, I had to. We embarked on our way, and we spent the entire day working on the tree. And I won't go into the details of that because I'm going to lead into the second story. So I think that Klaus felt a little guilty. And the day after that, at the end of the day, he invited me to his house, and over a bowl of lemon sherbet, he told me the story. And the story was that he and his wife one morning left their house and came upon a basket with a cloth over it with mushrooms in it. And they, both of them knew quite a lot about mushrooms, and they were chanterelles, and they were thrilled, and they had them that evening. The next day, again, there was a basket with a cloth over it. And this day, there was a kind of mushroom called the destroying angel. Klaus was concerned. He wasn't sure he had no idea who was leaving these mushrooms. Third day, there's another basket on his porch, and they are, again, chanterelles. The fourth day, it's the Amanita muscaria, the red cap with the white, again, a very poisonous mushroom. So this went on for about 7 days, and he could not figure out who had left these mushrooms. And one day, the next week, he was driving down Randolph Hill Road, and Jack Ruthman, his green pickup truck, was coming up with his dog in the back. And they stopped, and they exchanged some pleasantries through the open window. And Jack said to him, "So, Klaus, did you get my gifts?" Klaus said, "You left the mushrooms? How could you leave me these mushrooms? And one day edible, the next day highly poisonous." Jack said, "What do you mean? I grew up using the destroying angels and the Amanita." And Klaus said, what would you possibly use them for?" I said, "Yeah, we grew up and we would cut the tops off the Amanitas. We'd put them in a saucer, we'd sprinkle sugar on it. We'd do the same with the destroying angels, and we would use them to manage the flies." And sure enough, when I researched it, the Amanita muscaria is also called the fly agaric, and it was used to kill flies. Yeah, I just always remember the story, because I also think he told me the story because he felt incredibly guilty for having made all of us cut that tree down, clear that tree off the path. And it's a story I've told many times. I love that story.
Three crows on a fence post, and this is their story. I want to take you back 25 years or so to a prior century, when I was a young patrol trooper with the New Hampshire State Police. Bill Clinton was president. Telephones were attached to the wall with a long cord. Mine still is. On this morning, I was standing in the gift shop at the Grandview Lodge when a woman burst through the front door, obviously very upset. "You need to get down there right away," as she pointed west. "You need to get down the trail's parking right of way. That's where they are. There's 3 of them hanging out there like crows sitting on a fence post for all the world to see." I had no idea what she was talking about. Just as I was getting into my cruiser, however, I received a call from Troop F, reporting 3 naked hitchhikers. My Appalachia, and could I check them out? So by now, this had piqued my interest. We had 3 crows on a fence post and 3 naked hitchhikers, all at Trails Parking. As I approached the trailhead, I saw several hitchhikers in the westbound lane. I started to slow and pull over, and the hitchhikers seemed genuinely pleased to see me coming their way. As I got closer, however, their enthusiasm clearly waned. Perhaps as they saw the light bar on the top of my cruiser and the words "State Police" on my license plate. It was probably then that they ultimately realized that I was not the type of ride that perhaps they had been hoping for. I
pulled my car to a stop. The three men were in fact hitchhiking naked. As I slowly exited my vehicle, I put on my sunglasses to protect my eyes from the view, and deftly installed my campaign hat atop my head at a proper 30-degree angle forward, so the brim just cleared the top of my glasses. You know the look. Once out of my cruiser, I stood there for a moment taking in the scene. Cars were driving by slowly, and several blew their horns. I noticed that the hitchhiker in the center was holding a small cardboard sign, which he now held low on his body just below his belt line. The other two were not so lucky. One was holding a shovel, the other a grub hoe. And I learned that day, if you're going to hitchhike in the nude, a shovel is a better hitchhiking tool than a grub hoe. For a shovel, held properly, is about the size of a large fig leaf and will help shield one's private parts from the midday sun. A grub hoe, however, is a different matter. For to get maximum coverage with a grub hoe, the handle must stick out straight from the body, that somewhat being an awkward pose, especially when hiking in the nude. So I pondered for a moment on what my opening salutation should be, and then said to the three hitchhikers, please, please tell me you are not the trail crew of the Randolph. No, the center one assured me proudly. We work for that other hiking club, the A's. They explained that a couple of friends were going to be coming along from Gorham, and this seemed like a great prank to play. But now here we were, standing on the side of the road, 3 moons facing west, and a shovel, a small cardboard sign, and a grub hoe protecting things to the east. I asked them their names, and then just to torment them a bit, for some form of written identification, which I knew they couldn't provide, but I just couldn't help myself. After further questioning, I told them this case was closed and suggested that they get their private parts properly covered before looking for another ride. They happily agreed and headed off towards the woods. But Randolph is a small town, and secrets are hard to keep. And then the newspaper called, and a story ran on the front page the following week. This past spring, just 4 months ago, Jenn and I flew west to do some hiking in Zion and Bryce National Parks. We had a great week hiking the cliffs in Zion and down the canyons of Bryce, and now it was time to fly home. We boarded the airplane, and a family of 4 seated themselves to my left, with the father of the group sitting down next to me. We buckled our seatbelts, the plane took off. After some time, the man next to me and I struck up a conversation, as strangers on cross-country flights oftentimes do. We talked about our work, our vacation, and where we lived. Before I knew it, we were a half hour out of Boston when the seatbelt sign came on and the plane started its descent back to Earth. The man next to me then asked politely, "Do you by chance recognize me?" I thought for a moment and replied that perhaps we had met, but I couldn't put a place or time to his face. He said, in fact, we had met once before in my official capacity as a state trooper. Well, I said, did I arrest you? And if so, how did it go? He explained in earnest that many years ago, he and a couple of friends were hitchhiking on Route 2 near Trails Parking in Randolph when I had stopped by to greet them. At that moment, I was clueless and said to him, "Huh? You were hitchhiking? So what was the problem with that?" And then he smiled, leaned in a little closer, and in a low voice said, "You stopped us because we were hitchhiking." And he paused. "You stopped us because we were hitchhiking. We were hitchhiking in the nude."
1971 to 1978, my brothers Alan and Dyke Usden and a group of close family friends served on the RMC Trail and camp crews each summer. Since we lived directly across Route 2 from the Amphibrock trailhead, the start up to Crag Camp and Grey Knob, and right next to the Ravine House pool, our house served as a hub of hospitality and sustenance for the crews. There was a steady stream of young men and some pioneering women coming to our home for iced tea, a meal, a hot shower, and a welcome diversion from their arduous work. This was long before Stearns Lodge existed or any other official gathering place for the crew in the valley. I was between 10 and 16 during that time, and the youngest of my siblings, and I remember being in awe of these incredibly strong and hardworking people. They were like heroes to me, out clearing the trails every day and hauling their heavy packs up to the huts. It was very exciting because we never knew who would be arriving at our house at any given time. The sound of limbers on the steps could bring either of my brothers, Jeff Bean, Holly Rising, Paul Bradley, Will Woodruff, Ben Campbell, Betsy Rising, Beth Beringer, Davis Woodruff, Fred Beringer, Brad Mieklejohn, or Bill Rising. Some we saw much more than others, but all would eat, drink, and rejuvenate. I remember that Davis Woodruff ate more food than anyone else. When Davis started walking up our long path before the driveway was put in, my mother could see him coming and would start worrying whether we had enough food for him. We had so many crew members constantly seeking hospitality that someone finally bought my parents, John Usden, who served as the RMC president during part of this time, and Josie Usden, a framed print that said, "Continuous lunch, all night, all day, all temperament suited." We didn't actually have these other things, but yeah. The house was like a restaurant. The print still hangs in our house right next to the kitchen, which was, of course, the focal point for the crew members' visits. Even though it was over 40 years ago, I still have some particularly vivid memories from this period. First, there was the iced tea. It wasn't made from tea bags. It was that granular Lipton iced tea mix loaded with sugar, and we drank gallons of it. My mother was always making iced tea. There was always iced tea in our refrigerator. To me, it was the smoothest, coolest, most refreshing drink ever. Then there were the butterscotch brownies with the chocolate chips, my mother's specialty. She would constantly make brownies and everyone knew it. A new batch would last only a couple of hours. Probably the most lasting impression I had from that time was the unforgettable aroma combination of body odor and woodsman's bug note. I can conjure it up right now. All those young men smelled of it, and that smell always reminded me of summer. Honestly, that smell was summer to me. Later on in life, when I began dating, I was shocked to learn that all men didn't smell like that. Finally, very often the crew members would sleep over at our house. We had 5 bedrooms, but there were 6 of us in the family, so the crew had to sleep in the living room. They would spread out all over the place in sleeping bags and assorted blankets and listen to 8-track music tapes. My room was the first one off the living room, and I would listen to them talk and laugh. I always wished that I could sleep out there with them, and I'll never forget when I was finally allowed to do so once. I was over the moon. Nothing could be as exciting as sleeping in a room full of young men smelling like body odor and woodsman's. The sights and sounds, tastes and aromas of summer may have evolved for me over the decades. But how wonderful that Randolph is a place where we can employ all of our senses as we experience the beauty and community of our little slice of heaven.
All right, once upon a time, there was a caretaker at the old Crag Camp. And this was the old Crag Camp, the one that was kind of
dark and gloomy, and it had a sort of bouncy floor, and it had a door that didn't shut too well. Okay, and one summer, one hot, humid summer day, a camp group came in. And of course, the camp group was far too large to fit in any of the bedrooms. So about 8 of the campers, when it was time to go to bed, were all bedding down in the kitchen area, which is in the main room of the old Crag. And that caretaker also was sleeping in that room because everybody slept in the caretaker slept in the main room. And so after we had turned off the Coleman lantern, and it had sort of flimmered and gone all blue and then made a pop and went out, one of them asked if the caretaker could tell a ghost story. Well, this was kind of odd because this particular caretaker has never told a ghost story before. So, thought, and came up with a ghost story that actually had come out of 10 Years Upon the Rock Pile, where essentially what happened is that once upon a time, there was a caretaker at the old hotel on top of Mount Washington. And after a stormy day, where someone had actually died in Tuckerman's, he was getting ready to go to bed, and he was happy because the storm had died down, and there was just a light snowfall. And he went to bed, and he shut the door, and what happened is he woke up, he fell asleep right away, and he woke up a little bit later, and there was snow falling on his face and a slight breeze. So he thought, geez, what did I do? I must have forgotten to shut the door. And he went out and he shut the door, he noticed the door was open, he shut it, he locked it, he tested the lock, and he came back and went down and lay down to bed. And he fell asleep right away. And shortly thereafter, he ended up with light snow falling on his face and a slight breeze. So he went over to the door and saw the door was open again. And this made him a little bit worried, so he started shouting to see if there was anybody around. And there was nobody around, but he still was kind of freaked out because of what had happened on the mountain earlier in the day. So he went and he shut the door, and he locked the door, and he nailed it shut. And went to bed, and fell asleep right away. Well, then what happened is he woke up a little while later, and there was light snow falling on his face, and a flashlight shining in his eyes. And this bothered him so much, he packed up all of his stuff, and he hiked down Mount Washington in the winter. All right, so that's the story the caretaker told. Well, since it had been a hot, humid day, there were some thunderstorms coming in from the west, and it only lasted a little bit of time, and suddenly the thunderstorms were there. There was a huge flash, kaboom, and whap! The door went wide open. And 8 kids screamed. So the caretaker went back over to the door and made a big deal out of making sure it was latched carefully. Just pulling on it, tugging on it, even though the caretaker knew full well that this door would just blow right open. Went over and clomped across the floor, made it bounce nice and good. Went back, lay down again. And about 3 minutes later, wham! The door went open. The kids started screaming. So this time the caretaker thought this game was far enough along and went over and then just hooked the door but didn't latch it to make sure that then for the whole rest of the night it would go boom, 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 boom. The next morning, there was 8 of the most bedraggled people and they packed up all their stuff and hiked down the mountain.
Okay, I've changed my mind 4 times about the story in itself. It was not the night before last, I think it was 3 nights ago. It had been really, really hot, and then we had this thunderstorm that just hung on the mountains and went on for about an hour. Was it 3 nights ago? Yeah, well, it was a day that turned out to be just like that. This was 30 years ago, as it turns out, when I and my wife Ann and her sister Barbie decided that we wanted to take all the kids across the northern peaks. And just for novelty, we wanted to start by going up the Cog Railway because, you know, we'd never gone up the Cog Railway and we thought we should do it at least once. So we drove down to the base of the Cog, and this consisted of me, my wife Ann, Barbie's children, Katie and Alexander, who were, Katie would have been 3 and Alexandra 6, I guess, something like that. Our children, Will, who was at that point about 2.5, and Liz wasn't born, but Ann was about 6 months pregnant with her, and Jason, our nephew, who was about 12. And we couldn't afford to send everybody up the Cog Railway, so Ann went up with the kids, and Barbie and I carried packs up the Jewel Trail to the summit and met them. And needless to say, all of this took a whole lot longer than we thought it would. So it wasn't until like 3 in the afternoon that we finally left the summit to start across the northern peaks. And it was a hot, humid, even up there it was terrible. It was buggy, there was no wind. It was really pretty miserable. The kids weren't enjoying it all that much. And the upshot of all this was that we got to Edmund's Call, and it was finally just really too dark to go any further. So we said, okay, we're going to camp here. And I brought a little Megamid tent with me along with the stove. Now, Megamid is it's just a pyramidal tent with no floor on it. And we set that up, and we chose a windy spot sort of up toward where the Gulf side skirts around the side of Jefferson to be in the wind because it was still so buggy. And we had dinner, we went to bed, and about an hour later, this storm that we had 3 nights ago starts. Really pounding down, huge winds. And of course we chose a windy spot, you know, it's specifically an exposed spot so that to chase the bugs away. But I started worrying about the tent blowing away because unlike a regular tent with a floor, if this tent blew away, it was just gone. And Barbie and Ann and I were awake the whole night, going out, stacking more rocks on the guy lines of the tent. It's a very lightweight tent. The kids, in the meantime, sleep through everything. They're, you know, 2/3 of the way out of their bags. They're sliding up from underneath. They didn't notice a thing. And finally, dawn comes around, and it's you know, socked in, foggy, about 45 degrees, and we start making our way down Israel Ridge and around the corner to Great Ogden Crag. Our destination had been to go to Crag and meet my friend Michael Hartrick, who'd come up from North Conway, and he just hiked up from the valley. And Michael, in the meantime, had gone up to Crag. We hadn't showed up. He went down the following morning and stopped at my parents' house. My parents said, "Where are they?" Michael never had any kids or anything. He says, "I don't know, they never showed up." We went back to North Conway. And we made our way down the Lowe's path, and we finally arrived at the very bottom and met Milton Smith, who at that time was probably 85, coming up the trail to rescue us. How much time do I have left?
1 minute.
1 minute.
1 minute.
Okay. Probably most of you know, I spent most of my life working, doing field investigations on glaciers, mostly in Alaska, but all over the world. And this was in Alaska around 1981. We were packing up to go to a trip. We were in Valdez, Alaska, packing up to go on a short trip into the St. Elias Mountains of Variegated Glacier. And my advisor at that time was rummaging around. We were in the helicopter hangar where we based our trips out of. He's rummaging around in the camping supplies, trying to put a little kitchen kit together. And he calls out to the rest of us, "Hey, has anybody got a little pot?" And one of the guys says, "Yes, no."
Wow, there are a lot of you. So I would like to share with you a piece that I wrote as part of an Arts Alliance writing workshop that focused on geography and memory. As one of the lucky ones that can live in Randolph year-round, the Hill Road is a significant part of my life, and it is the setting for this story that I'm going to share with you today. I remember leaving her house
on a hot summer afternoon. It was a good visit because she was finally feeling better, now that the heart surgery was becoming more of a memory than a reality. I was walking back home, smiling to myself at the beauty of a coherent conversation, when I saw him walking to his mailbox. As I approached, he opened the door to the black box, feeling the coolness inside as he reached for the white envelopes reflecting the sun. He turned and saw me, and I raised my hand in greeting, still smiling to myself. "How are you?" I asked, because it had been a while. He answered me in a choked voice. "She died this morning, so I came home to check me in." The smile left my face. In the split second of silence, the sound of cars on their way to everywhere and nowhere buzzed in my ears. Not sure I had heard correctly, hoping I had not heard correctly, wishing I had not heard this. I felt my heart fall, and I reached out to give a big hug, because that is what you do when you don't know what to say. Behind us, the battered mailbox gaped as if it too had no words.